Hey, if this is your first year filing taxes, you may feel a little overwhelmed. There may be some anxiety, especially as you start receiving things from your employer, or you look at the 1040 and you're like, wait, where does this stuff even go? I understand this. I work with beginning taxpayers all the time, either as a tax professor or as a parent or just helping other beginners throughout the process as they file their taxes. I'm well aware of the areas of stress and anxiety and the areas of confusion that happen year after year after year. So I've decided to go ahead and do this video for new filers. It slows down the process, helps you understand the big picture and what you need to be doing next. So in this video, what I'll do is I'm not going to throw a bunch of different numbers at you. I'm going to just kind of give you a big picture overview of what taxes are, how they're being filed, what the process is, what some of the forms are that you may be receiving, how it relates back to your 1040, and then I'm going to give you a nice map for how you should be going through this process. Because it's important to note that when you look at that 1040, the document you're going to be filing when you do your taxes, you may not be dealing with every single line. And it's okay to skip lines if they don't apply to you. That's what you're supposed to do. So we're going to take a look at that process. I do have a detailed line by line playlist that you can use. But even with that, we need to start out and understand kind of what these taxes are. And I'm going to direct you to the process that you should be using, even if you're going to watch these other videos, so that way you're oriented correctly and you're not just starting out with, hey, what is our filing status, and some of those difficult questions. We're going to start using the tax form and then we'll work our way back. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look at the general map and what it is that we're dealing with when we're dealing with our tax returns. So what we're looking at is our basic overview of what we're dealing with when we're dealing with our tax return. You see, a tax return is simply a summary of what we earned and the expenses we had during the tax year. And that's helping us figure out, well, what is going to be our taxes due? So this is a summary, and it takes all kinds of different forms that we may have received, and this is what we use to determine our tax liability. So the first thing we start out with here is going to be the income, and that's going to come from different types of forms that we have. It's going to be including things like maybe you received a W-2 because you work for somebody, or maybe you're doing ride share, so you're Uber or Lyft, or you're working for Instacart or whatever it is on deliveries. Well, maybe you're self-employed, so you're going to be receiving a 1099 perhaps in that situation. Maybe you have interest on your deposit in your checking or savings account, or maybe you've invested and you have some dividends. All those things would fall under income. Then what we do is we go to adjustments, and those are things that are going to reduce our income. So adjustments are great because it reduces the amount that we're going to be taxed on. So we love adjustments. So we always want to make sure we're taking the maximum number of adjustments that we can. That's going to help bring us over to a line that's going to be called the AGI. I didn't want to put it on the summary because I don't want to confuse you, but that's going to be the first video that I'm going to recommend after this video is going to be your AGI versus your taxable income. So once we get to AGI, we have a couple other decisions we make. We're going to look at the standard deduction and we're going to look at itemized deductions. I ignore itemized deductions on this because most new filers are going to be taking the standard deduction. That's going to help us get to the tax components. We're going to figure out, well, how much do we owe in taxes, right? Or what is the tax liability? But now what we're going to do is we're going to take credits. So credits are going to reduce the amount that we owe on our taxes, dollar for dollar. So credits are great for us. We'll look at different credits in other videos, but just know right now that credits are going to be out there and it reduces your tax liability. So if you owed $400 in taxes, but you have credits of $300, now your tax liability is only $100. So credits are better than deductions. So we always check credits after we come up with what our tax liability would be. And then we may get a refund if we've paid too much after credits. Or we may even have to owe in certain situations if we haven't paid enough as we've gone through the process. Now, like I said, I go through these in other videos, so if you're still feeling overwhelmed, that's fine. I'm just trying to give you the overview right now. So you probably started receiving different types of information from your employer or bank or maybe an investment brokerage firm or whatever. So let's go ahead and look at some of these different documents that you may receive so that way we know what you might want to be on the lookout for as you get ready to do your taxes. So you should have started receiving either emails saying, hey, your W-2 is available or whatever, or you're receiving them in the mail themselves. But these are the forms that you'll probably start to look for. Now, all of these won't apply to you. Some of them will. It depends on what your personal position is. But you may receive a W-2. That's giving you your job wages. You may receive something called the 1099 NEC. That's if you're self-employed, something like on Instacart or some of the rideshare companies. You might have a 1099 INT, which is going to be your bank interest, which can come from savings and checking accounts, or the 1099 DIV, which comes from dividends that you may have received. So when you start receiving these forms, maybe you've already received them, what you're going to do is you're going to start putting them to the side so you're ready to use these for your taxes. So you need these for your taxes as you're going through. So let's go ahead and see what will happen when we have these forms and how it relates back to the 1040 that you're going to be filling out. So as we start to receive these forms, what we have to realize is everything goes back to our 1040. You see, our 1040 is a document that provides that summary to the IRS. So all these other forms that we're receiving, their purpose is to be brought back to the 1040, so we only file the 1040 so the IRS can see that summary. So the 1040 is going to include information from our W-2 or 1099s. It's going to include our adjustments, which we'll see on Schedule 1, and it's also going to include credits, which we may need separate schedules for. But you could think of the 1040 kind of as a hub. That's where all the information is going to eventually end up. So when you get the W-2, what will happen is that's going to appear directly on your 1040. So you'll take the W-2 information and you're going to be looking at things like box 1 to bring it over to the 1040 line 1. You're going to see that the 1040 also has things such as your withholdings. Well, those are going to also appear directly back onto our 1040. The 1099 NEC, now that one's a little different. We don't take your 1099, the information you receive on your 1099, we aren't directly bringing it back to your 1040. It has a couple pit stops. What's going to happen is we're going to take the information from the 1099 and that's going to be brought over to a Schedule C. And then what we're going to do on the Schedule C is we're going to take the amount from the Schedule C and it's eventually going to go to Schedule 1, and then the Schedule 1 amount is going to be transferred onto our 1040. So that's what's happening when you're looking at the 1099 NEC. So you're not going to see a direct connection from your 1099 NEC onto your 1040. It needs to take that pit stop. Then you're going to have adjustments, right? And those are going to appear on your Schedule 1. So you're going to be taking that amount from your Schedule 1, and that's going to come back as an adjustment over on your 1040. So a lot of times it's currently line number 10 is where you're going to go from your Schedule 1 adjustment portion, and it's going to appear back on your 1040. But it originates in Schedule 1. There's a couple other schedules that you would see out there. So you can see something like a Schedule A, which would be if you're itemizing deductions, such as you had a house and you're paying interest on the house, or property taxes, state taxes. But look, like I said before, most taxpayers, beginning taxpayers, and even seasoned taxpayers today are taking our standard deduction. It's 90% of taxpayers now use the standard deduction. So I wouldn't worry too much about Schedule A in your itemized deductions. I'd be focused more on the standard deduction. Now, if you do have a home, you do have a high level of medical expenses, a lot of property taxes or state taxes, you can do the test and you can see which one's going to be greater because you'll take the greater of them. But I left it off this summary because most are going to be taking the standard deduction. And then what you're looking at are the credits, and you have separate schedules that are going to help you figure out what credits are available. And I have separate videos on every single line on the 1040. So if you get caught up with a line, you're able to go right to that line to be able to figure out what information or how to fill out that portion of the line. All right, well, let's go ahead and take our next step and start looking at some of the actual meat of the 1040. All right, so here's what's happening if you receive each of these different types of forms. And again, you're not going to receive them all. It's going to depend upon your exact position. So what I want to make sure you're aware of is When you're with the 1040, you do not have to fill out every line. It's okay to skip lines. It's expected. You're just going to be dealing with the lines that actually apply to your personal situation. So the 1040 is kind of broad because it's dealing with so many different taxpayers. And that's also why we have so many different schedules and different forms, because each taxpayer is unique and it has to be designed to where it's able to capture all these different taxpayers. So you're not missing anything. If you're skipping out on that line, that's normal. A lot of times that's going to be normal. So here's what we're looking at. If you have a job and you're getting income from a job, you probably have a W-2. Well, when you get that W-2, what's happening is you're taking the wages and that's coming over to line 1A. And if you get multiple W-2s, you're adding all that up on line 1A. Or if you're married, you and your spouse are filing jointly, then both your spouses and your own amounts go from your W-2 directly onto line 1A of our 1040. If you receive a 1099 INT, and a lot of taxpayers do, even if it's just a little bit of money you receive it, that appears directly on line 2 of our 1040, and that's interest income that we received. The 1099 div is for dividends, and what we're looking at is that goes on line number 3 as dividends. You have the 1099 NEC, so that's if you're self-employed or you're working kind of in a gig type of thing. What happens on that is that one goes over to Schedule C, then it's going to eventually make a stopover on Schedule 1, and then it's going to come back to line number 8 on your 1040. So it's possible if you're only self-employed and you don't have a W-2, you may not have any amount on line number 1. Where most taxpayers are working for somebody, they're going to have an amount on line number 1, but they may not have something that's going to appear on line number 8, which is our other income for like business income. Then we have our 1099 miscellaneous, and that one's going to be going to Schedule 1 to line number 8 as well, so other types of income is going to appear there. We have unemployment. Again, that also goes on Schedule 1, and that's going to be put together, and it goes on line 8. So if you're looking at this theme, look at what's happening. For line number 8, we're dealing with our Schedule C. We're dealing with miscellaneous. We're dealing with unemployment. It's because on line number 8 of our 1040, we're saying other income, and that's all classified as other income. If you're receiving Social Security, that's going to be on line number 6 for Social Security benefits. Now, it doesn't mean that it's all going to be taxed, right? The maximum amount that percentage of your Social Security that could be taxed if you're receiving retirement is going to be 85%, but it could be far less than that. So there's a video that kind of walks you through where it goes and how we figure that out. Retirement withdrawals, 1099Rs, which you'd be looking for, and that's going to appear on either line number 4 or number 5, depending on whether you have a pension or what type of retirement. If you have nothing but the W-2, then you know what? You're just going to do line 1A, and you're going to skip ahead, and you're going to go look at your adjustments on line number 10, right? So it depends on what type of forms you've received and what actually applies, because it is okay to skip these lines if they don't apply to you. And then there's other forms that are going to be out there that you may want to look at, Schedule A, those types of things. I have separate videos that address those types of multiple forms. But this is a pretty good summary of what you're looking at when you're dealing with your 1040 and what kind of documents you should be looking to collect, and then where it's going. So whether it goes directly on to our 1040 or whether we have to worry about the Schedule C and the Schedule 1 and those types of things. All right, well, let's go ahead and figure out what we should be doing next. So what videos should you be watching next so it makes logical sense as you start to go through your 1040? Because I'll tell you, when you look at the 1040, it starts out with things like filing status and can somebody else claim me as a dependent, but it's easier when you're first understanding taxes to start out with the form, get to line number 11, because you don't have to make a decision on the filing status stuff until you're at line number 11, because it's not really impacting you. So at that point, once we get to that line number 11, we need to understand whether we're going to be filing individually as single, or whether we're married filing jointly, or whatever our situation is, and whether we can be claimed as a dependent by another taxpayer, such as our parents. All right, so let's look at the next steps. So if these videos are being helpful, please remember to go ahead and subscribe to this channel. All right, so let's go ahead and figure out what you should be doing next. Where do we head next? Now, I will have linked to this video the next logical step, which is going to be our video on AGI versus taxable income. It's an important distinction because AGI plays such an important role when we start looking at credits and what deductions we can take, because certain things start to phase out. So we want to start out and understand AGI versus taxable income. Again, that'll be linked here in the recommended video next. After that, what we want to do is we want to start looking at lines 1 through 8 plus Schedule C if you receive that 1099 or are self-employed. Okay, that's where you're going to be reporting your income. So lines number 1 through 8 all deal with the income portion on the 1040. Now you can skip some of these videos if it doesn't apply to you. If you don't have any interest, if you don't have any dividends, then maybe you don't have to watch line number 2 or line number 3. Or if you're not self-employed or have other forms of income, maybe you don't need to watch line 8 and Schedule C. So you're going to go ahead and figure out which of these lines are actually applicable to you, and those are going to be the ones that you want to view. So you don't need to view all of them. The next one is the adjustments. So after we've come up with taxable income, it's all going to be added up on line number 9 on our current 1040 form. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take those adjustments, right? This is going to help us reduce the amount of taxable income that we're going to have. So we'll start looking at the adjustments. So you want to go ahead and you want to watch the video on our Schedule 1 and line number 10, because those are going to show you what adjustments you may be able to qualify for. That brings us over to line number 11, our AGI. Now, again, I'm going to have you first start out with AGI versus taxable income so you understand the difference, but that's what we'd be looking at now. For the third one, is going to be the AGI line specifically. Then I have you go back and I have you looking at your filing status. So when you look at the 1040, the filing status is at the top of 1040, yet I think it's easier to understand after you've gone through your income and your adjustments. All right, now we have to go through our filing status and we have to determine, are we single? Are we married filing jointly? Are we married filing separately? Are we a head of household? Or are we a surviving spouse? So those would be the different types of filing statuses you have. The reason it matters is because it's going to dictate what our standard deduction is going to be. Also, as part of that thing, if you think that your parents may be able to claim you because you're a college student or maybe you're in high school, well, then you want to also watch the video on Can I Be Claimed? Because that's going to help you determine it. That's an optional video. It just depends on whether you think your parents may be claiming you. That can alter what your standard deduction is going to be. For the fifth one, we have our standard deduction versus our itemized deductions. Now, I have a video that compares those two, so that would be a good video to go ahead and watch. I can tell you right now that in most instances, it's going to be the standard deduction. You don't have to worry about the itemized deduction. As a matter of fact, if you don't own a home and you don't have an extremely high income where you're paying a lot in, say, state taxes, state income taxes, and you don't have extremely high levels of health expenses this year, then you're going to be taking the standard deduction. So if you know you're going to be taking the standard deduction, you don't need to be able to watch the standard deduction versus the itemized deduction, because about 90% of taxpayers are taking the standard deduction. And then finally, I have you looking at the credits and the payments for the videos. So that's going to be the order that you want to go through when you go to my playlist for the 1040 line by line. It's going to have all this information plus far more. So if there's any other areas that you're getting caught up on, that's going to be a go-to resource for you to help you figure out what's going on. All right, I hope these videos are being helpful. I hope it helps demystify some of the process, because there's so much misinformation out there, which is why I do these videos. If it is helpful, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, and good luck as you continue to work through these taxes.